My guest this week is a star of the big screen, the small screen and the theatre. Billy Campbell's acting career has included roles in every genre, from sci-fi and fantasy to global mega hit Dynasty and family adventure The Rocketeer. But his roles in tense thrillers like The Killing and Cardinal have firmly established Billy as an icon of the crime genre, and that continues with his new series, the upcoming Canadian noir thriller, Something Undone. Billy talks about being on set with Coppola, the advice he received from John Forsyth on Dynasty, and legendary actor Anthony Hopkins on Bram Stoker's Dracula, and how his standout role on Cardinal almost didn't happen. Enjoy. Hi Billy, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Danny. Glad to be with you.
All right, it's great to have you on board. I always like to start with a fun question, and my fun question to you is this. You're clearly a man with a keen interest in history, and as an actor, you've played several significant historical characters. But if you could choose one historical character who you could play, somebody from history in either a film or a TV series, which one would you choose and why?
I've always wanted to play Macbeth. And now, of course, he is a historical character. He was, I guess, mainly fictionalized by Shakespeare. But I've always been a little skittish about the idea of playing historical characters. I actually went to Morocco to play Moses in a not very, I don't want to say it wasn't good, but it was spotty, I suppose, and maybe I was one of those weak spots, but I did go to play Moses, and I think that was the first one that I was really, really nervous about, and I thought it was ridiculous. And again, they were kind of insistent. And a friend of mine, Lloyd Levin, he was one of the producers on Rocketeer. Apparently, he read in the trades that I was going to play Moses. Somebody I knew was having breakfast with him, that I was going to play Moses, and he he threw down his trade publication and sort of mock anger half yelled that Billy Campbell is the least Jewish person I've ever met in my life. Nevertheless, I went to Morocco, and mainly I overcame my nerves about playing a historical character because I wanted to go to Morocco. So there you have it. There's an upside. There's always an upside.
Did you want to be an actor from a young age, and how did you get started in the business?
I had no notion of being an actor, but I think what happened was my mother on my 17th birthday, I think it was my 17th birthday, took me to a Civil War reenactment in Virginia. And of course, I had grown up a boy in Virginia, and you can't do that without having the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War being more or less a part of your life. And I was immediately absolutely enthralled. It was the first moment I ever really remember falling in love with acting. And then in high school, I was messing around in the hallway outside of my English teacher's classroom, where she was also the drama teacher. She was holding auditions inside the classroom for a play that they were going to put on. And I happened to be goofing around in the hallway with somebody wrestling outside the hallway, outside that classroom, and making a good deal of noise. And she came out and grabbed me by the scruff and said, "You're either coming in here to audition for this play or you're going down to the principal's office." And I had already been to the principal's office that day, and I did not want to go again. I knew he'd be disappointed. And so I went in and auditioned for the play, and they gave me the lead in the play. And it was It was The Man Who Came to Dinner, the Moss Hart, George Kaufman show. And then I got the bug.
Your first major role came in 1984 when you landed the part of Luke Fuller in Dynasty, or Dynasty, as the American listeners would.
Or Dysentery, as some call it.
Yes, that would be a harsh way of putting it. What's it like joining the set of a massive TV series like that and a cast of a long-running show that's been working together for some time?
I mean, it's mind-blowing, for one. I mean, I think at the time, Dysentery was the Dynasty, was the Dynasty, was the, I think it was the top-rated show on U.S. television at the time. So I felt like I was, off on a rocket. But in terms of joining the cast, it was just 100% pleasure, and mainly because I think particularly 2 or 3 of the cast were just so professional and so lovely. John Forsythe in particular, and Linda Evans, Jack Coleman, with whom I'm still pals. And they were just gracious people. I think I asked John Forsythe one day, I think I asked him, I was, after I got comfortable around everyone, though, I mean, if you weren't going to get comfortable around John Forsythe, then I don't know who you would be comfortable around. He's just a wonderful gentleman. But I asked him one day for his, I don't know, advice or secrets or something. I can't remember exactly. But the advice I remembered to me was always hang up your clothing. Always hang up your clothing. He said, people come to work, they come to work earlier, they go home later, they work for a fraction of the pay, they get none of the glory, and don't leave your clothing lying around for them to hang up. And to this day, I remember that. I remember where we were sitting when he said that, and I have never, ever, ever left an article of clothing not hanging up. And more to the point, I mean, of course, that's slightly sort of, the advice is wry. I think what he was actually saying was, be considerate. This job is no excuse to get an exaggerated view of yourself.
Your next big role was on US detective series Crime Story. And over the course of your career, you've played heroes and villains, police detectives, and as you say, serial killers like Ted Bundy. Do you prefer playing bad guys or good guys? And why would you choose one or the other?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. I had this conversation with Sean Doyle, my buddy Sean Doyle. He was in the first season of Something Undone. He played the cop in Newfoundland. And we've worked together several times. He was also in Cardinal, won an award for his work in Cardinal. But I had this conversation with him, and I think it's fun to play the bad guy. I think there are more options for behavior. Do you know what I mean? Like, a bad guy can pretend to be anything, but a good guy usually is, to a fault, being himself. And so maybe it's more fun, but it's also a challenge not to, in playing a bad guy, not to do the bad kind of acting and indicate things. But then I also think there's like a challenge to playing the good guy, which is maybe above and beyond the challenge of playing a bad guy, which is to invest or inject some subtlety in that makes the good guy human and not just a good guy. So I don't know. All things considered, it's a lot of fun to play a bad guy.
Your big breakout film role came in 1991 with Disney's The Rocketeer. Does a lead role bring a new level of pressure and scrutiny when you're in a big Disney movie?
Well, yeah, I guess it does. I mean, I'm not sure I've ever really been one to worry so much about scrutiny, for better or for worse. Blithely, I think, sometimes unaware of what other people are thinking. But I remember a great deal of feeling and a feeling of anticipation, feeling like it could be the moment, it could put my career in a different place, and I suppose by a kind of association that would mean that I was aware of people scrutinizing me.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more that you've got a big studio like Disney who will have lots of notes and will be checking the rushes, and so the whole scale of it becomes on another level, and then the pressure to deliver then ramps up as well.
Yeah, I think that person that took the brunt of the studio pressure was really Joe Johnston, the director, with whom I think the studio had or at least he had an acrimonious relationship with the studio, and they were awfully, awfully meddlesome, sending down, they had like 2 studio executives assigned to the picture who were quote unquote creative executives, who, if I had to venture a guess, neither one of them had ever taken an art design class or a production design or anything. They were both probably graduated, the Ivy League schools with accounting degrees or something. And they were sending down copious notes, like artistic notes, production design notes. And this is Jim Bissell, who is one of the better production designers in the entire business. And he's getting design notes from studio execs who had not a whit of experience with production design. So, it was a very bitter pill, I know, for Joe to swallow. And I remember there was one day that was sort of indicative. He was grousing and grumbling because they wanted yet another costume test, stand in front of the camera and show the costume. And Katzenberg had sent down notes. I want the pants tighter. I want the jacket lower. I want the boots some this way or that. And Joe he was fuming. And he said, here's what we're going to do. He said, I want you to run up to Katzenberg's office and get a meeting with him. And just before you meet him, hitch up your pants, pull up your boots, pull down your jacket, and tell him we made all the changes. And so I did. I ran up to Katzenberg's office, and here he comes after waiting 10, 15 minutes. And he was very pleasant to me. And I said, Mr. Katzenberg, we made all the changes to the wardrobe. What do you think? And he said, that's great. That's great. That's just what I wanted. And good luck with the movie. And I went away. So, yeah. But that pressure, I didn't feel that myself. I think that was mainly Joe.
And then another director on your next movie was a different, probably different scale, which is Francis Ford Coppola on a Sony movie, Bram Stoker's Dracula. What was it like to be on a Francis Ford Coppola set?
Oh my goodness. Just heaven, as you can imagine. It was absolute and utter heaven. And there you go from one, the first circumstance with Joe battling the studio to a Francis set where, for all intents and purposes, he is the studio. He controls everything. Nobody's going to tell him what to do artistically on his film, though I think he did have some battles to fight. But it was heaven. It was heaven. From the very beginning, we went up for 10 days to Coppola's estate, his vineyard in, was it Napa Valley, I guess? And we went out drinking in the evenings. We had script read-throughs. We had music together. We went horseback riding. We went flying gliders, hot air ballooning, all kinds of stuff. Just to, his theory is that, as he expressed it to us, was that when you have these experiences together, beforehand, then you'll get on camera in a scene and you'll be acting together, and you'll remember something you did, the hangover you both had a couple of weeks ago, or worse, and that spark will pass between your eyes, and it informs the informs the work. And I think he's probably right, or maybe it's just an excuse to have a good time before the film starts. I don't know, but it was absolutely amazing. There I was sitting in a rehearsal barn at a big bunch of tables set in a big square. On my left hand was Anthony Hopkins. I just, rubbing elbows literally at the rehearsal table with him for hours at a time, just like peeking surreptitiously over to look what he does with his script, which was interesting, by the way. He had a color-coded script. He had 5 or 6 different color-coded pencils laid neatly next to his script and different markings on his script. And I remember asking him, Anthony, what do you do in terms of preparation? And he said, I read the script. And I said, yeah, okay. Yeah, I do too. What else do you do? He said, I read the script. I read the script. I read the script. I read the script. And then I read the script. And I was like, he said, I read the script hundreds of times. And that's his preparation. Anyway, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So, and then to be with Francis, who was just the most open, warm, passionate fellow. I remember a day when he was like having trouble with a shot or something. Not necessarily trouble with it. He was he was a little sort of bemused or something by a setup, and he couldn't quite figure it out. And I know he was talking to Michael Ballhaus about it and everything. And I think they had worked together before. But anyway, the craft service fellow was nearby. And I think he was just at that moment offering something to the Francis and the, Michael and some others. So he was right there. And Francis turned to the craft service guy and said, I can't remember the guy's name, but it might as well have been Fred. He said, Fred, what do you think I should do? And a couple of the people nearby who heard him, he didn't whisper it or anything. He just said it out. He just asked the craft service guy what he thought about the shot. And a couple of the people nearby who were new to working with Francis kind of laughed like they thought it was a joke. But nobody else around him, Michael or anyone else who worked with him or any of his regular crew who were within earshot, even batted an eyelid, because as it turned out, the question was in earnest. And he listened to the guy's answer, which seemed reasonable to me. I don't remember if he made a change based on it or anything, but what I do remember was that he absolutely listened to it. He absolutely thought about it. And then he did whatever he did. I don't remember, but I had this realization that he was absolutely open to input from anywhere, from anyone. And I found that joyful.
Alongside your film and TV work has been a career in the theatre. What were your standout roles that gave you the most pleasure? And does the power of live performance trump screen acting?
Oh, yes. It is my first love. It's how I found acting. And I would say that live performance is, to me, it's analogous to sailing. You're working with a crew, with shipmates, and you're fashioning a course, and you're setting the sails, and the breath and the energy of the audience is as the wind in the sails. And if everything is well, you come to a distant and magical shore. And I love it. I love live performance, and I also love film, but in a much, much different way. That's like doing a jigsaw puzzle, and which, as you know, can be a very solitary thing. And my favorite of all of my live performing was the years that I spent working at the Southern California Renaissance Fair, playing Petruchio in a half-hour version of The Taming of the Shrew 4 times a day. And this is the Southern California Renaissance Fair in San Bernardino on a flat black stage, and which is not covered from the sun. So the midday performances became, the stage was like a frying pan. You couldn't really even on a strongly sunny day stand in one spot for more than a few seconds without hopping to another foot or to another place. And and of course there was a lot of Guinness, and there was a lot of running around the dusty lanes between shows, picking sword fights and wenching and all that sort of thing. Anyway, yes, I love the live theater, and I'm dying to do it. And if anyone happens to be listening to this podcast and wants to hire me to maybe do Macbeth at the Wanamaker Theater, the recreation of the Globe over there on the bank of the Thames, please feel free to get in touch.
Excellent. It's another dimension to Here Comes Pod, which is a casting call platform.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Which is great. You've worked extensively in sci-fi and fantasy, including Star Trek Generations and Prodigy and Helix, and for 3 seasons on the 4400. Is it a genre that you think naturally you gravitate towards, and does sci-fi especially offer you exciting creative possibilities?
Yes, I do gravitate to fantasy and sci-fi. I think part of that is, in my youth, from about the age of 10 to 16, I guess, I went to a Baptist military academy in Virginia, and where I first found fantasy and sci-fi. I had a dire need to have somewhere to escape to. And a teacher of mine, who is wrote a book of the best short stories you'll ever read. His name was Brees Pancake, believe it or not. He turned me on to The Lord of the Rings, and that was my escape. And so that was the beginning of my fantasy and sci-fi love for fantasy and sci-fi. In fact, the screensaver on my phone to this day is the watercolor he did of Tolkien did of Hobbiton across the water. It's my happy place. And so I've always been partial. I mean, fantasy and sci-fi are, when you boil them down, they're speculative fiction. And it's like a thought experiment. And Star Trek, for my money, is more fantasy than it is sci-fi, but it's still a lot of fun.
And you were almost Riker, apparently.
I was almost Riker. The better man got the job, I have to say, I have to admit. But I was almost Riker. I did audition for it. Junie Lowry, who's the casting director, has given me more work since I got to LA than any other person. And she called me up one day and said, do you like Star Trek? And I said, I love Star Trek. And she said, well, there's going to be another one. And you're Riker. And I was like, what do you mean? And of course, I'm sure she was telling Jonathan Frakes the same thing at the same time. But anyway, it came down to myself and Jonathan. And to be honest, I got to the final audition, and it was, a room full of studio execs, and me and Jonathan waiting outside, and Junie sitting there at a table full of directors and studio execs and so forth. And Jonathan went in first, and then he came out and shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, good luck in there. And perfect gentleman. And I went in, and I absolutely lost my shit. I completely froze up like a block of ice. And I could just see Junie on the other end of the table, because it was just us. It was the two of us. It wasn't anyone else. And I could see her, and her face was just fell. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I disappointed you. I've made you look like such a fool for suggesting me. And so, of course, Jonathan got the job. And then not so long later, I called her up. I knew they were in production. And I called her up and I said, Junie, I have to apologize. I'm so sorry. And I know I disappointed you and blah, blah, blah. She said, oh, honey, don't you even think about it. She has this lovely Southern accent. Don't you even think about it. They're so shit happy with Jonathan Frakes. They love him so much and he's so wonderful. And I'm like, oh, I'm so relieved. And she's like, don't you even think about it. She later put me in The Killing. I mean, she's just given me more work than anyone. And I said, well, does that mean you're not mad at me? She said, I am so not mad at you. I love you. And I said, well, does that mean, like, could I do an episode? And she said, you want to do an episode? She said, I'll call you back. And I don't know if she called back that day or the next, but then I got my episode.
Your wife is Norwegian and you live in Norway. And that link with Scandinavia continued with The Killing, which you mentioned, the AMC remake of the Danish hit series.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate your performance in a role that's already been played on screen from that original performance?
Well, I try not to think about it, to be honest. Though I did, it was impossible not to think about it at all, because I did watch. They did provide us the original Danish on DVD to watch, and I was absolutely and utterly addicted. In fact, I was flying at the time, and I was stuck in Newark Airport. I remember watching 6 hours of the thing in Newark Airport and not even wanting to get up and go to the toilet. I was so addicted, and I was like, I have to do this. And the person playing whose part I played was my friend Lars Mikkelsen, who I only met through The Killing because I happened to be in Copenhagen visiting Anna, who was in architecture school. And I called the producer and I'm like, I know the show's coming out over in Europe. Anything you want me to do while I'm over here? And he said, yeah. And he arranged for me to be on a morning talk show in Denmark with Lars, whose part I played in The Killing. And then we went out drinking beers after that and became friends. So I tried, honestly, Lars Mikkelsen is one of the great actors. I'm not just saying that because he's my friend. You know, I just tried not to think about it. Of course, I met Lars after I'd already played the part. And I just tried not to think about it, you know. I mean, they're pretty big shoes to fill. I did also play Lincoln right after Daniel Day-Lewis had played Lincoln and shot in the same town of Richmond, Virginia. So I tried very much not to think about that either.
And your love affair with Canada continued, because you mentioned how much you enjoyed being in Vancouver, with your outstanding role in the crime thriller Cardinal, which is a show that I was a massive fan of. Was it great to be filming in Canada again? And what do you think were the key elements that made that show such a hit?
Well, of course, it was great to be in Canada again. I have, ever since I first stepped off the plane in Vancouver to shoot something, and I think it was 98, big, stupid Bruckheimer TV movie. I just fell in love. I fell in love immediately. And I had always been in love with Canada from childhood because my family have always had a little cottage up in Muskoka Lakes, north of Toronto, since I was a boy. And so for Canada used to mean to me summers at the lake, you know. And so I loved Canada for childlike reasons to begin with. And then as I grew and became an adult, I came to love Canada for more grown-up reasons. One of which is, as soon as you cross the border, you just don't hear politicians droning on about God and who's moral and who's not and so forth. It's just a more reasonable place. It has its, you know, foibles, but it is a vastly more reasonable place. And so, yes, to be back in Canada, my agents have known for years that, you know, half the reason I would do a job is if it had to do with location, you know, and Canada was my primary desire. So they were always trolling for things, and of course, Cardinal came around, and it was set in Canada, which also has its, first day of shooting, 40 below, with an exterior scene. So that was something. But I don't know if I told you this in London, but I almost didn't do Cardinal. I had promised to Anna. She would be in her final, I believe it was 2017. She would be in her final year of architecture school, and we had Anton was young at the time, and I had promised her. He was like 3, I think, and I had promised her I would be around for her final year there in Copenhagen and take care of the kid. Architecture school is unbelievably difficult. I come to understand. And then this came up, and I read the first couple of pages, and I must have told you this, but I have kind of a mini casting director in the back of my head, and if I read something and I think, and that casting director back in my head thinks, I can't see myself in that, I wouldn't cast me in that, right? I find it really difficult to go on an audition or even take a job if it's offered, if I can't see myself in the part. Within the first 2 pages, I think I saw myself in the part. I thought I was perfect for the part. And yet I said no. I called Sean, my manager, and I said, it kills me, but I can't do the job. I promised Anna I'd be around, take care of the boy. I can't do it. He's like, okay, man, okay, that's fine. And thankfully, like a week later, he called me up and said, you know what, these folks from Cardinal, they're sniffing around again, and they just want to know if no really means no. And I thought, oh my God, it was like a dagger in my heart, because those things don't come around that often, Anna was on a study trip to Japan at the time, and I FaceTimed with her, and I said, there's this gig in Canada, and it's really good, and I just thought I should let you know before I turned down this kind of money. and I told her, I said, I already said no, so you don't even think twice about it, right? I know I promised you taking care of the kid, so you really don't think about it. You just say yes or no, and it's all good, and I'll never think of it again. And she said, well, can I read it? And I was like, okay, sure. I don't think she'd ever read a script before, right? So I emailed it to her in Japan, and we talked a couple of days later. And I said, so what did you think? She said, well, I think you should do it. And I'm like, really? My heart started beating. I said, but I promised you I'd be around for a year, and I already said no. And I swear to God, if you say no, I will never mention it again. I'll never think of it again. I'll put it out of my mind and my heart. She said, is this something that you really would be passionate about if I wasn't in the picture? I said, yeah, honestly, yes. She said, I think you should do it. And I started crying. I'm getting a little teary now thinking about it, but she karma came back to her, because Cardinal is the thing that has opened more doors over here than any other thing I can think of. So yeah.
And in fact, you are now back in another Canadian crime thriller, Something Undone, playing the character of a priest who is seeking redemption for his murderous past. I mean, you talked about it earlier, crossing the border into Canada, and it feels like a more reasonable place. And I think that's how the rest of the world thinks of Canada. But do shows like Cardinal and Something Undone actually reveal a darker side to the country that Canadian creatives are able to tap into, a kind of a snowy flip side of Southern American Gothic?
I think that's a very good point. I mean, we referred to the show as Canadian noir, kind of like Scandi noir, which I think The Killing did a whole lot to kick off. And yes, I mean, there is a dark side to Canada. Of course there is. I mean, you name me a place where there's no part of its history is dark, and I'll move there.
So finally, I always like to ask my guests about their media choices. And so, given your love of traveling and sailing the high seas, which single film, book, TV box set, and music playlist would you choose to accompany you on your next big voyage?
Oh my gosh. A single film. I mean, the film that sort of changed my perception of film, I think, was Eight and a Half. Fellini's Eight and a Half. I walked out of the theater kind of, I think it was the Film Forum in New York City. I walked out of the theater floating. I felt like I was floating, full of possibilities. It just, it was the first time I think I thought that film could be more than film. So, and that's not to say that I think I have refined taste or anything. It's just that I saw the possibilities. So maybe it would be Eight and a Half. As far as books, if the book is a trilogy, can I take the trilogy? And if there's a single prequel, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because that would suffice me for the whole voyage. Either that or the Master and Commander novels of Patrick O'Brian. Those are my two favorite big pieces of writing in the world. TV box set, the 2 seasons of Rome, HBO's Rome. Playlist. Now, a playlist is comprised of individual songs that might not be of the same genre. So,
or an album, a favorite album.
Oh my God. Well, the first album that pops into my head, there's a Danish kid who I actually tried to get to do the music for The Killing. I tried to put him together with the producers, but they had the same musical musician do the music from the original, who was also Danish. But his name is Mike Sheridan. And he made an album when he was 14 in his parents' basement. It's a kind of ambient electronica, though that doesn't do it justice. The album is called E Siv Sind, and it, more than maybe any album in my life, takes me on a voyage every time I listen to it.
Well, Billy Campbell, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been fascinating to hear about all the different elements and experiences you've had in the film and TV business. I'm very excited to be working on Something Undone with you. So looking forward to having more conversations with people about that. And I'm also hoping that one of your future roles might be to play a rabbi, because that will allow me to come up with one of my terrible jokes, which reflects your 6'4" frame, something along the lines of a cardinal, a priest, and a rabbi all walk into a bar, and the barman says, "Why the long actor?"
That's what's known as a dad joke, Danny. That's pretty good.
And that's my stage in life.
That's pretty good.